My name is Isabel Monroe. And I learned the hard way that loyalty is not a virtue everyone deserves. If you had told me 5 years ago that my own mother would sell my childhood home behind my back and hand the profits to my brother, the same brother who once stole my scholarship and called me ungrateful, I would have laughed. I don't laugh anymore. I'm 35 now. A clinical psychologist living in San Diego. But every story has a place it begins. And mine started in the small town of Maple Creek, where love looked a lot like silence, and family was just another word for obligation. Growing up, I was the peacekeeper. The invisible glue that held 3 volatile people together. My father, who drowned his failures in whiskey. My mother, who polished them until they shone. And Ethan, my golden child brother, who could crash a car, lie about it, and still get cake for dessert. They called me the serious one. Translation, the one they could lean on. Blame. And forget all at once. When Dad died suddenly at 53, the night I defended my dissertation, Mom said, "At least your brother was with him," as if proximity to the corpse earned moral credit. Ethan had driven him home from the bar that night, both of them too drunk to spell responsibility. The car wrapped around a telephone pole. Dad died instantly. Ethan walked away with a bruised rib and a lifetime pass for guilt. Mom never saw fault in him. He's been through so much, she'd say, while I filled out the insurance forms, handled the funeral, sold Dad's tools, paid the bills. I stayed 2 more years to help Mom stabilize. Then I left for California, telling myself distance was healing. For a while, it was. I built a life, a practice, a reputation. I even fell in love with Daniel Reyes, a civil engineer who looked at blueprints, the way I looked at people carefully. Like every line mattered. We were saving for a down payment, planning a future, the kind of stability I'd never had growing up. Then last spring, Mom called. "Ethan's in trouble again," she said, voice tremulous but rehearsed. "He needs help with the mortgage, just until he gets back on his feet." The mortgage she meant was my childhood home, the one Dad had left to both of us equally in his will. I'd agreed years ago that Mom could live there rent-free as long as she maintained it. "How much does he need?" I asked. $50,000, she said, like it was the price of air. I almost dropped my phone. "Mom, I can't just. It's family," she interrupted. "You're doing so well, sweetheart. But generous. Generosity is a funny thing. It sounds noble until it becomes a weapon." I told her I'd think about it. But a week later, I got a certified letter from a bank in Maple Creek. It said the property at 402 Briar Lane had been sold, not refinanced. Sold. My name wasn't on the transaction. I called her that night, voice shaking. "You sold the house." Her sigh came through the receiver like static. "It was Ethan's idea. We were drowning in debt. He found a buyer. A buyer. A developer. He's building luxury condos. It was a good offer." "How much?" $800,000. I couldn't breathe. That house was worth maybe 6 on a generous day. "And you didn't tell me. I was protecting you from the stress," she said softly, the way she always did when she wanted forgiveness before confession. "What about my share?" Silence. "Mom, it's complicated," she whispered. "Ethan needed the money for legal fees." Legal fees. My vision tunneled. What did he do this time? "A misunderstanding," she said quickly. "Something with a business partner. It'll all be fine." It wasn't. I dug. Because that's what psychologists do. We look for the root. Turns out Ethan had been running a crypto investment fund for local retirees, promising 40% returns. Classic Ponzi. When the market crashed, so did his conscience. He owed nearly $500,000 to investors, including Mom's bridge club friends. She'd signed papers for him, co-signed loans, liquidated everything to cover what she could. The only asset left to sell was the house. And now it was gone. I flew back to Maple Creek the next day. The developer's sign was already up, future site of Briar Heights condos, luxury living from the 800 seconds. Luxury built on the bones of my childhood. When I pulled into the driveway, Mom was watering dead hydrangeas. She looked smaller than I remembered. But the guilt that twisted in my gut didn't stop me from saying what needed saying. How could you sign away Dad's legacy without even calling me? Because you would have said no, she said simply. That was the moment something inside me cracked, not loudly, but decisively, like glass under pressure. I realized she'd never seen me as a partner, only as an obstacle to her loyalty to Ethan. Inside, boxes were stacked to the ceiling. We're moving into Ethan's place for a while, she said. He needs me. Of course he did. Parasites always need a host. I left before I said something unforgivable. On the flight back to San Diego, I stared out the window and thought about revenge. Not the loud, movie kind. The quiet kind that starts as justice and hardens into precision. 2 weeks later, the developer called my office. Dr. Monroe, we're finalizing permits for Briar Heights. But there's a small issue. The deed transfer lists you as co-owner. We need your signature to clear title. My heart stuttered. They couldn't build without me. And in that tiny legal loophole, I saw a universe of possibility. I'll review the documents, I said sweetly. I spent the next month reconstructing every financial thread in our family. I found that Dad's original trust had an heir consent clause, meaning any sale of the property required both children's approval. The notary on the developer's deed had been Ethan's drinking buddy. Fraud. I hired a lawyer quietly, efficiently, like sharpening a knife. We filed an injunction, halting the construction until the title dispute was resolved. The developer threatened to sue. My lawyer welcomed it. The court date was set for late summer. When Mom found out, she called in tears. You're destroying your brother. No, Mom, I said softly. He did that himself. You always think you're better than him. No, I just think I'm not obligated to drown beside him. She hung up. Ethan texted an hour later. You'll regret this. You're just jealous. I finally did something big. Big. That word again. Big like fraud. Big like failure. Big like the mess he'd made of all of us. The months that followed were a blur of depositions, documents, and sleepless nights. The developer tried to pressure me into settling. Take $50,000, their lawyer said. Walk away. I smiled. That's what my mother said too. They didn't understand. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about restoring the truth that had been twisted since childhood, that my worth was negotiable. When the first court hearing arrived, I flew back to Maple Creek alone. The courtroom smelled like wood polish and judgment. Ethan sat at the defendant's table. Expensive suit. Hollow eyes. Mom sat behind him, glaring at me like I was the criminal. The judge called my case number. My lawyer stood. Your Honor, we intend to prove that the sale of 402 Briar Lane was executed without the required consent of co-heir Isabel Monroe, rendering the transfer void. Ethan's attorney smirked. We have notarized signatures from a notary currently under investigation for falsifying deeds, my lawyer said calmly, handing over the evidence. The judge raised an eyebrow. Ethan shifted. Mom looked confused. That was just the beginning. By recess, the judge had granted a temporary freeze on the property. No construction. No sales. No profit. The developer glared at Ethan like he'd personally sunk their fortune. Outside the courthouse, Mom caught my arm. How could you do this to your own brother? How could you let him do this to me? I whispered. To Dad. Her eyes filled, but not with remorse, with anger. You've always needed everything to be fair. Isabel, life isn't fair. Then maybe it's time it was. That night, alone in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and drafted a plan, not revenge. Not yet. but something meticulous and beautiful. I called it Project Redemption, because if they'd sold my childhood home without my consent, I was going to buy something they could never take back their reputations. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the angry kind of resolve, the kind that burns fast and leaves ash. No, this was colder, focused, surgical, the kind that makes surgeons steady their hands before cutting out a tumor. Project Redemption wasn't about rage anymore. It was about balance. About the quiet satisfaction of restoring order to a life that had been hijacked by chaos since the day I was born. I spent hours combing through digital records, piecing together every lie Ethan had told. Bank statements, shell companies, false invoice. His so-called investment fund had been nothing more than a rotating door of borrowed money, paying off old investors with new ones. He'd even listed our father's old tools as business assets for collateral. I should have been horrified. I wasn't. I was methodical. Each discovery went into a color-coded folder. Red for fraud, blue for property, yellow for family communications. Every lie had a paper trail. And every trail led back to the same person, my brother. The boy who used to steal my Halloween candy and tell Mom I'd eaten his. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same childish selfishness had just evolved into white-collar crime. 3 weeks later, Milavier, Carla, called. "We've got leverage," she said. The notary's license was revoked. "If we push, the court will likely void the sale completely." "What happens to the money?" I asked. "It reverts to escrow until the rightful owners are determined, which means if you don't sign off, your brother doesn't see a dime." For the first time in months, I smiled. Then we don't sign. Word travels fast in Maple Creek, especially when it smells like scandal. By the time I flew back for the second hearing, the town was buzzing. The once pristine sign for Briar Heights luxury condos had been vandalized with spray paint "Greed Kills Homes." Someone even left fake eviction notices on the construction fence, addressed to the Monroe family. Ethan showed up at court looking like a man unraveling. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by rumpled jeans and a hollow stare. Mom was with him again, her makeup thicker, her eyes more disparate. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. When the judge entered, the air felt electric. Carla stood beside me, composed and lethal. The opposing counsel looked like he hadn't slept in a week. After reviewing the new evidence, the judge said, flipping through the file, "This court finds sufficient proof of falsified consent and breach of trust in the sale of 402 Briar Lane. The deed transfer is hereby voided. All related financial transactions are suspended, pending further investigation." Ethan's lawyer muttered a curse under his breath. Ethan slumped forward, hands in his hair. Mom turned toward me, her lips trembling. "You've ruined us," she whispered. "No. Mom," I said softly. "He did. I just stopped pretending otherwise." That night, I drove out to the old house. The front door was sealed with court tape. The porch creaked beneath my feet, like it remembered me. Through the window, I could still see the faint outlines on the wall where family photos used to hang birthdays. Graduations. The illusion of happiness. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the scent of dust and rain. Then I whispered, "I'll rebuild you. Not for them. For me." It wasn't a metaphor. I called a friend from college, a developer with a reputation for ethical restoration projects. "I want to buy back 402 Briar Lane." I told her, every inch of it. She paused. "You sure you want to pour money into a cursed house?" I smiled faintly. "Curses only work if you believe in them. I believe in receipts." The next few months unfolded like an opera, every act grand. Painful. And strangely beautiful. The state opened a formal investigation into Ethan's business dealings. Investors came forward in droves. Lawsuits piled up. The condo developer filed bankruptcy, claiming irreversible reputational damage. My mother called weekly at first, then monthly, then not at all. I let the silence grow roots. Daniel, my boyfriend, stayed through all of it. One night, he brought dinner to my office. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "I do," I replied, "at least until it's done." He nodded, understanding in that quiet way only good men do. "Then I'll wait at the finish line." I didn't know it then, but those words would matter more than anything. Months later, by December, I'd bought back the property at half the original price. The irony was poetic. Ethan's fraud had tanked the market value, making my victory cheaper. I didn't rebuild the old house. I restored it exactly as it was Dad's study. The porch swing, even the stubborn oak tree that split the driveway every spring. But I added one new thing, a brass plaque on the front gate that read, "Integrity lives here." The day construction finished, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a letter, handwritten in Ethan's messy scrawl. "Izzy, I messed up. I know that's not enough. I thought I could fix it, make something big of myself. Instead, I lost everything. Mom won't talk to me. The investors want blood. I'm sorry about Dad's house. I'm sorry about all of it. You were always the strong one. I hope you build something beautiful again. E." I read it twice. Then I burned it in the fireplace. Some things aren't meant to be kept. The next time I saw Mom was at the grocery store. Of all places. She looked older, smaller. A woman whose world had finally shrunk to fit the truth. She avoided my eyes until I said her name. "Mom." She froze, then turned slowly. "Isabel." We stood there for a moment. Two women, bound by blood but divided by choices. "I heard you bought the house back," she said quietly. "I did." "Why?" "Because it was mine." Her eyes softened, just slightly. "He's in rehab now," she said, "for gambling and other things. He's trying. I hope he makes it," I said honestly. She nodded, then hesitated. "You always were too good for this family." "No, Mom," I said. I just finally stopped letting it define me. When she walked away, I felt no anger, just the calm that comes when a storm runs out of things to destroy. A year later, I reopened 402 Briar Lane, not as a home, but as something better, the Monroe Center for Restorative Psychology, a free counseling program for families affected by financial trauma. It was funded entirely by the settlement money I'd won from Ethan's civil case. On opening day, Daniel stood beside me, hand warm on my back. "You turned a graveyard into a garden," he whispered. I smiled. "It's what I do." We cut the ribbon together, and I swear, for a moment, I could feel my father's presence in the breeze, steady, proud, finally at peace. Because this wasn't just revenge anymore. It was reclamation. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you thought was family, I want you to remember something. You don't have to destroy them to win. You just have to stop letting them destroy you. Sometimes the sweetest justice is rebuilding in full view of those who thought you'd never rise again. The grand opening of the Monroe Center brought people I hadn't seen in years, teachers from high school, neighbors who used to borrow sugar from Mom, even the old pastor who'd preached at Dad's funeral. They all smiled at me with that peculiar mixture of admiration and disbelief, reserved for people who survive family disasters and somehow turn them into something graceful. I gave a short speech, the kind that felt like an apology to my younger self. This building once held everything I thought I'd lost: memories, mistakes, ghosts. Today, it holds new beginnings. Healing isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about proving it didn't break you. When I looked up, I saw Mom standing at the edge of the crowd. No makeup this time. Her hair gray and unstyled. Her hands clasped like she was praying for permission to exist in the same air as me. I didn't call her forward. But when the applause faded, She stepped closer anyway. "You did something good here," she said softly. "I know," I answered. "I'm not to gloat, but because I needed to believe it myself." Her eyes glistened. "I never knew how strong you were." "You didn't have to know," I said. "You just had to stop doubting it." We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But she stayed for the rest of the event, quietly helping one of the volunteers stack chairs at the end. That small act felt like an apology in a language we both finally understood. A few weeks later, I got a call from Ethan's rehab facility. The counselor said he wanted to see me before he was discharged. My first instinct was to say no. But something in her tone, some weary compassion, made me pause. "He's been clean for 3 months," she said. "He's not the same man who hurt you." That line echoed in my head for days. Finally, I drove upstate to see him. The facility was simple. No luxury spa masquerade, just a brick building surrounded by pine trees and silence. I found him sitting on a bench. Thinner than I remembered. His posture humble in a way I'd never seen. He stood when he saw me. Eyes cautious but steady. "Hey, Izzy." "Hey," I said, keeping my arms crossed to stop them from shaking. He gestured to the bench. "Sit." I did. The air smelled like pine resin and clean beginnings. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't." He nodded, rubbing his palms together. "I can't undo what I did. I know I ruined everything. Mom. You. Dad's memory. I just wanted to be someone, not the screw-up everyone whispered about." "You could have just tried honesty," I said quietly. He laughed without humor. "That's harder than it sounds." Silence stretched between us, full of every unsaid thing. Then he looked at me and said, "They're letting me do community service when I get out. Debt counseling workshops for teens. Thought you might have a place for that at your center." I studied him, searching for the smirk that used to hide behind his apologies. There wasn't one. Just exhaustion. Maybe sincerity. "If you're serious, we'll talk," I said finally. "I am," he said. For once. As I drove home, I realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore. The wound was still there. But it didn't ache. It just existed. Like a scar that had accepted its permanence. Months passed. Ethan started working part-time at the center under supervision. He was quiet. Punctual. Humble traits I never thought he'd possess. Sometimes, when he talked to the teens, I'd hear him say things like, "Don't borrow from tomorrow to fix today." I'd catch him glancing at me then, as if seeking silent approval. I didn't give it. Not yet. But I didn't look away either. Mom came by every Friday to volunteer in the garden. We didn't talk about the past anymore. She'd bring cookies, hum under her breath, sometimes wave at Ethan from across the lawn. It was fragile, imperfect, but it was peace. One evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, Daniel and I sat on the porch steps watching them work. "You ever think about leaving Maple Creek for good?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "I used to. Now I think about staying long enough to make it better." He squeezed my hand. "You already did." That night, I walked through the restored house alone. The floors creaked the same way they always had. The walls smelled of pine oil and memory. In Dad's old study, I'd left his radio exactly where it was, the same one that used to hum softly while he tinkered with his fishing rods. I turned it on. A jazz station flickered through the static, filling the room with something that sounded a lot like forgiveness. I sat there for a long while, talking to him in the quiet way. Daughters talk to ghosts. "You were right, Dad," I whispered. "Love isn't blind. It just chooses not to see until it's safe again." Through the window, I saw the sign gleaming under the porch light, "Integrity lives here." It wasn't just a motto anymore. It was proof that surviving betrayal doesn't have to turn you into stone. It can make you solid, instead steady. Grounded. unshakable. A year after opening, the Monroe Center received a Community Excellence Award. When I went up to accept it, the applause felt less like validation and more like closure. I thanked the volunteers, the donors, and even mentioned Ethan by name. This center was built on mistakes, I said, and the courage to admit them. If you're here tonight, I want you to know you're not defined by who broke you, but by how you rebuild. Afterward, Mom hugged me for the first time in years. Your father would be proud, she whispered. I think he'd be relieved, I said, smiling through tears. When I tell my story online, people sometimes comment, "You got your revenge," but that's not what this was. Revenge is about pain. This was about reclamation. About taking back my narrative from the people who wrote me as the villain for simply wanting justice. If you're watching this and you've been betrayed by the ones you trusted most, listen to me. You don't need to burn everything down to rise again. Sometimes the best revenge is a quiet life built on your own terms. One where peace itself becomes your victory. So if this story touched you, if you've ever walked through fire and come out clean, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment telling me the moment you realized you were done being the victim. Maybe your words will help someone else find the courage to rebuild. Because healing doesn't erase the scars. It teaches you to wear them like armor.